Hi, good evening. Let's see if I can give a few slides to talk about the topic for our next seminar, multiple baseline and multiple probe baseline designs. Okay, I hope that after today or Wednesday being together, you will be able to describe procedures for implementing multiple baseline and multiple probe and multiple baseline designs and be able to critically evaluate them with respect to internal and external validity, as well as to be able to visually analyze multiple baseline and multiple probe designs. All right. So these are variations on one approach. Both are widely used for academic and other non-reversible behaviors. Multiple baseline means taking continuous probes during baseline for behaviors that are not likely to gradually improve. Multiple probe, fewer staggered probes during baseline, but there are lots of rules to follow in terms of timing. 3 further iterations, you can have tiers across behaviors, contexts, or participants. Okay, now the text talks about internal validity, and there's a couple of things you can look at there, as well as in chapter 1. But basically, we're going to just talk about a few things. One is this idea of functionally independent while being functionally similar. So what's that all about? Functionally independent means if you see improvement in one tier, you're not going to see improvement in the next tier until you start the intervention. Functionally similar means the dependent variables are related to each other. So I'm going to talk about some research that I've done over the years a little bit later, and I work on writing. So I look at the quality of students' writing, how long or how much they write, and I look at things like how many elements that are in essays that I'm looking for. So those would be examples of functionally similar. Now, behavioral covariation or covariation means you are seeing generalization where you didn't intend to. So if you see two things happening at once, it's not a good situation. If you didn't plan for it and it's not theoretically been predicted, that will result in inconsistent intervention effects. You can take a look at some examples in the handout. Figures 10.1, 10.2, we'll talk together when we meet. Okay, so now I've been doing this for a while, and I have done several studies with SRSD. One last one there is a little bit different, something called cognitive apprenticeship. There are also variations on a theme. Let me tell you a little bit about SRSD because it's evidence-based type of instruction for students with and without learning disabilities. And the article for this week that I'm sharing with you is intellectual disabilities. So I've done it as well as others. Okay, well, let me just stop and say a little bit about what SRSD is. Self-regulated strategy development. It's a model that combines instructional strategies with a means to self-regulate. And this approach was developed by Karen Harris in 1982. The goal is to teach strategies that students need in order to write while supporting them to be motivated. Taking specific needs of each student into account is central to this approach. It can be done with an entire class, small groups, individual students from second grade through secondary school, high school. All right, so my first study, this is from my dissertation, teaching students to plan before they were composing. We wanted them to go through some steps, suspending judgment about a topic, brainstorming ideas about the topic, then taking aside what they believed, organizing ideas in terms of which ones they wanted to use and then what order. And the last step is to keep planning to think about things like the structure of an essay with the different parts, including supporting ideas, arguments, etc. Okay, so if you were to take the time to read this little slide here, I hope you would see that each of the 3 students, and these are made up names, improved quite a lot from before to after, so baseline to post-treatment. So there's some little essays. I think I remember these kids were around 10 or 11 years old, if I remember. Okay, so back in the day, before What Works Clearinghouse asked researchers to have longer baselines, it was okay to have the first baseline be 3 data points and not 5 as it is now. So this is a graph, which is the multiple probe and multiple baseline, and you're looking at 3 students with baseline after treatment and maintenance 6 weeks later. Okay, so those were writing assessments, and we'll go on. I next did this a couple of years later in settings that were with general education teachers, and we're looking at students in middle school. Okay, the difference, I probably showed this already, I know I did, but if you want to see it one more time, these were data points for students who were identified as having a learning disability, or they were students in the regular classroom. We gave a writing test, and we found out afterwards students were either low, average, or high achieving with respect to their writing ability. And so this is going to show you the different results from 3 different teachers. And so we have lots of kids. I can't remember, maybe 22 or 24 kids, something like that overall. Okay, then a little bit more recently, looking at revising, teaching kids how to revise their writing after they wrote, and looking at students who were English learners, English language learners, and novice writers. So those were students with learning disabilities, as well as some of the other low achieving, etc. But these were kids who didn't really know how to revise before we taught them. So it's a long study. Took several weeks. Keep moving my camera around here. But basically, one side of the screen, you see the graph or the figure for the students with learning disabilities. And then on the other side, on the right, on my right, you see a similar graph. At least the results are similar for students who had been identified as learning English. So that was their first language. In this particular study was they were either native Spanish speaking or native French speaking. So the results are very similar for the 2 different populations, which helps us generalize or helps us support the claim that this type of instruction is helpful for 2 different populations of learners. Well, that's why we did that study that way. And then the last study, just to show, is where in science, the goal is to write causal explanations where you have a cause and effect, where you're asking the students to identify independent variables that lead to some kind of a phenomena. And so we taught the kids, we had a little bit of a set of instructions here to help them learn to write better explanations about things that were happening in experiments that they were watching. Okay, so the last is we have data points for pairs of students. These are also made up names, but in each pair, one of the students had a learning disability and one of the students was an English language learner. Okay, so the basic idea is that with this, technically, it has been compared to a series of A-B designs with a staggered phase change. Before you start, the researcher selects multiple behavior settings or people expected to respond independently to the intervention. You go ahead and have your baseline. You have an intervention for one data series. The baseline continues for the others, and then you're going to repeat this. Okay, so the rules are 3 or more baselines concurrently established and intervention is sequentially introduced. Then we also have the rule that if you have multiple behaviors, the behaviors must be independent from one another. I already mentioned that one. And that functional relationships are established by evaluating behavior across different baselines, meaning people, behavior, or settings. So the benefits are you don't need withdrawal or reversal. You don't need to alternate the conditions. That it eliminates the threat of carryover from the B phase back to the baseline, rules out history, maturation, or other extraneous factors that could account for the observed change. Okay, so what do? You collect initial baseline probe on each either behavior, participant, or setting. Then you return to the first behavior, participant, or setting, collect at least 5 more probes. You don't need to collect any more data on additional behaviors. You begin intervention with the first, and then when the criterion is met or there's a clear change in the behavior, you're going to collect 1 more additional probe on each of the remaining behaviors, participants, or setting. Okay, then you return to the second. You go ahead and collect 3 to 5 more probes than the first time. Then you begin intervention with the second, collect 1 or 2 more probes. When you meet the criterion, then we're collected on the second tier, and you complete the intervention phase with the last. So you just keep going with this. Advantages and disadvantages: less data to collect, at least with multiple probe compared to multiple baseline. It still controls for things that we want. It can be useful. It depends. It is true sometimes you still can have an issue with testing because there still are a fair number of probes. 2 types of multiple baselines. I've been mentioning concurrent. That means that data are collected on all behaviors across all settings and all participants simultaneously, which is really what we've been looking at throughout the whole time that we've had together in the seminar. Non-concurrent, it is done. It's a little bit critiqued as being not as rigorous because data is not collected simultaneously. I'll show you that in a second. Solves the problem of having a hard time with data collection, but it might cause another. So there are some other additional things that we could talk about randomization, and do that a little bit later when we're together. So here's the picture of this non-concurrent. Oops, sorry about that. I just ended the slideshow and I want to go back, just get that last picture up there before we go. So let me go ahead and bring it up. So this last picture, there we are. Here you go. You are looking at some kind of intervention. On the top left, it shows the school year 2006 to 7. Then on the top right, 2007 to 2008. And then on the bottom center, 2008 to 2009. So it's the same kind of a staggering baseline, but the data was collected in 3 different school years. And so we want to have the same conclusion that the intervention worked. It's easier to collect data if you do it across 3 years, but it's a little bit weaker because we really can't rule out as many of the threats to internal validity. Okay, so that's it. I'm done. I hope you all are well. Thank you. See you all soon. Bye-bye.